You did not lose your motivation. You just drifted away from yourself for too long. That sentence cuts straight through the shell you use to hide your exhaustion. It does not accuse you. It does not comfort you. It simply reveals a truth many people fear to face. Sometimes what drains you is not a lack of effort, but the fact that you have been running on a path that was never yours, under a sky full of noise that never turns quiet. And when that noise fills every empty space, the first thing that disappears is not your energy, but your ability to hear the true breath of your soul. There are mornings when you open your eyes, the ceiling slowly fading into the new light, and you cannot understand why your body feels as heavy as stone. It is not sickness. It is not lack of sleep, but a sensation like someone is gently pulling your spirit into a nameless depth. You lie there, listening to your heartbeat, knowing you have to get up, to begin, to deal with the long list of tasks waiting for you. But in that moment, something tries to hold you back, as if your own body is whispering that it is not ready to continue a life it no longer belongs to. People often call that feeling laziness, or lack of discipline, or weakness. But the real weakness is forcing yourself forward without checking whether your feet are still standing on the ground that is truly yours. You are judged by a world that demands productivity, that wants you busy, that wants you to keep running. But how can you run when your mind has never been allowed to stop? How can you find motivation in a life where every quiet moment is filled with noise? Imagine a small room with dim light and a slightly open window. Outside is the flow of people, the sound of traffic, the notifications on your phone, and countless calls pulling you to keep up. Inside that room is you, only you. And between those two worlds is a thin glass wall that sometimes your eyes can no longer see. You think you are living inside, but the noise from outside has slipped through every small gap, taking over the silence you once used to think, to feel, to exist. The glass wall does not break. It only becomes so foggy that you no longer know where you are, outside or inside, living by your own choices or being swept away by everything else. Each day passes like a spinning current. You reach for your phone before you even understand how your morning feels. You watch short videos while waiting for the elevator. You listen to music while walking so you do not have to hear your own thoughts. You keep pressing into things that fill the space, and the more you fill, the emptier you become. That emptiness is not loud. It sinks like an invisible layer of dust, covering everything that once excited you. You do not notice it at first. It arrives slowly, bit by bit, until you sit at your desk, unable to move or look at a goal that once mattered, but now means nothing. You believe you have lost your motivation, but motivation does not disappear that easily. It only steps back into the shadows when you look toward too many places that are not meant for you. It slows down when you live at a pace that goes against your nature. It falls silent when you keep letting something else speak for it. If you look closer, you will notice small signs showing your mind is overloaded. They are like delicate cracks on a glass cup, hard to see but widening over time. One moment when you no longer feel excited about something you once loved. One moment when you realize you forgot something important and do not understand why. One moment when you sit beside someone you love, but your mind is somewhere else. One moment when you hear yourself laugh, but do not feel the laughter. These small moments begin to connect, forming a full picture of a soul running out of strength. The root problem is not lack of willpower. It is that your mind has been forced to hold too many things without the space to process them. Thoughts that have no name yet, emotions pushed aside, fears pressed down, desires forgotten. All of them crowd into a space that was already too tight. And when there is no room left to breathe, the mind switches things off. It pauses, not because it wants to quit, but because it wants to save you from the scattered chaos you never noticed. How long has it been since you allowed yourself to be still, to sit in complete silence, without searching for sound, without turning on a device, without letting your hands do anything at all? How long has it been since you asked yourself a slow question? What am I living for? Maybe that question appeared, but you turned it off before it could take shape. Not because you do not care, but because you are afraid. Afraid of the answer. Afraid of the truth that maybe you have tried so hard on a path that was never meant for you. Afraid to look at the parts of yourself that have been waiting for a quiet moment to speak. The exhaustion you feel does not come from laziness. It comes from living too far away from your own center for too long. And any soul, no matter how strong, will burn out when it has to run on someone else's orbit. under a light that blinds instead of warms. What you feel is the first signal of a return, a small but powerful whisper telling you it is time to pause, even if only to hear what your inner voice has been trying to say. When a noisy life pushes you to the edge of numbness, that numbness becomes the doorway. Not an ending, but a beginning. A gentle awakening calling you to turn around and face the inner land you have avoided for so long. A land without bright lights, without flashing notifications, but full of the things you once lost. Things that deep within the growing silence, you still want to find again. Yourself. Perhaps what drains us the most is not the big shocks, but the hurried rhythm of countless small things pouring into the mind each day. We do not notice it right away, because overload rarely arrives with noise. It happens quietly, the way a drop of water falling on the same spot can carve into stone without making a sound strong enough to startle us. But at some point, the mind begins to thicken, unable to think clearly, like a room stuffed so full that nothing else can be added. That is when the inner space becomes saturated by the stimuli we once thought were harmless. The human brain, shaped through thousands of years living in nature, is used to the rhythm of sunrise and sunset, the sound of wind, and long stretches of silence, far beyond anything we experience today. It was designed to work in cycles that include rest, recovery, and empty space for thoughts to settle into shape. But the modern world has twisted that rhythm into one continuous curve with no pause and no gap. Every time the mind nears silence, we cover it instantly with a familiar action: opening the phone, turning on sound, watching a stream of new images. There is no moment left for the mind to breathe. We think those small actions are just for entertainment, but in truth they are ways we avoid facing ourselves. We scroll the screen not because what we see matters, but because the silence inside makes us restless. We search for the next video, not for the content, but because we fear the lingering emptiness, fear the thoughts rising from the deep. The more we avoid, the larger the blur becomes. The more we try to fill, the emptier we feel. And in that emptiness, motivation begins to fade. Not suddenly like a switch turning off, but slowly like a candle dimmed by many soft gusts of wind. One day you notice you no longer feel excited about something that once thrilled you. Another day you try to begin something, but your mind keeps drifting. Then on the days that follow, even a simple task like tidying your room feels too heavy. You do not know why. You only feel as if a layer of fog is covering every intention, slowing every movement, weighing everything down. Most of us, when falling into that state, try to push ourselves harder. We create more plans, set more goals, force ourselves to be more productive. But the truth is, the mind cannot absorb anything new when it has not released what is already piled up. Forced busyness is like pouring more water into a cup that is already full, even though we know that with just a small tilt, it will spill over. We make ourselves keep going, but inside something is cracking a little more each day. Overstimulation changes the way the brain experiences the world. Simple joys lose their beauty. A slow conversation cannot hold attention anymore. An unplanned afternoon becomes uncomfortable instead of peaceful. The mind, used to a fast pace, begins to demand more and more. Small bursts of stimulation turn into habit, making deeper experiences fade. The inner life starts to lose its color, but more frightening is when that loss of color spreads to who we are. When we no longer recognize our own emotions. When we cannot tell which desires are real and which are automatic reactions to what the world pushes onto us. When we begin to live like a copy of what others expect to see. This separation does not happen overnight. It is like layers of glass being placed between you and yourself. Not to protect, but to hide. When the distance becomes wide enough, motivation cannot find its way through. It becomes a small glow trapped in a closed room, unable to reach the surface of action. You try to feel it, but all you sense is a strange exhaustion, as if every direction lacks life. You want to move forward, but can find no footing. You want to change, but cannot find the doorway inward. Moments like that make people believe they have lost their worth, that they are becoming useless, that they are failing. But the truth is simpler and softer. The mind is asking for rest, for stillness, for a return to its natural rhythm, not to escape life, but to find its true place within it. What we call lost motivation is sometimes nothing more than the body reacting to being pulled too far from its center. If you have ever sat alone and felt something inside sinking without a name, that is not weakness. It is a sign that the parts within you, the parts silenced by noise, are asking to be seen. They do not need chaos to speak. They only need a quiet space to step into. And when you do not give yourself that quiet, they begin to send signals by slowing you down, taking your interest away, making you move gently, letting you feel the emptiness like an unseen crack beneath the surface. Overstimulation is not just a state. It is a structured fatigue, a form of disconnection between you and the deepest layers of your being. And before you can find motivation again, you must face this truth. The mind cannot continue to live on scraps of information and short bursts of pleasure. It needs room to recover. It needs silence to hear itself again. It needs time to reconnect the threads that have been cut by a life lived too fast. When you dare to accept that truth, a new door opens, not toward the world, but toward the inner self. That is where true motivation once lived, and that is where it is waiting for you to return gentle and patient. Overload does not only tire the mind, it erodes a vital human ability once essential for survival, the ability to reflect. Not quick thinking, not analysis, but the quiet observation from within where meaning forms slowly. When empty space disappears, that ability fades too, like a mirror left untouched for too long, showing only a blurred reflection of who you are. There are moments when you sit down to begin something simple, but your mind feels like a surface of water shattered into fragments by countless ripples. No thought lasts long enough to take shape. No feeling stays clear enough to name. You just sense your mind running from one point to another, reacting to everything around you like a dry leaf tossed by the wind with no anchor. And in that moment, you realize you have forgotten how to look into yourself with the stillness you once needed. A mind that cannot settle will slowly lose its ability to recognize what matters. It rushes after meaningless concerns, temporary needs, fleeting invitations that appear and disappear in seconds. It is pulled toward whatever is bright instead of what is deep. And as a result, it begins to loosen, not in a literal sense, but in the way every inner connection becomes thin. Motivation, instead of being a force rising from within, is replaced by the reflex of chasing signals from the outside. This exhaustion does not show itself all at once. It arrives through more delicate signs. You struggle to stay focused in a genuine conversation. You cannot hold a long line of thought. You lose your presence when facing an important decision. And when you lose the ability to see deeply, you begin to live by shallow choices, rushed decisions, steps without weight, as if you are holding a map but have no idea where you are on it. The most dangerous moment comes when the mind loses the space between emotion and reaction. That space was once where you chose, considered, and recognized what was true for you. Now it is filled with countless small stimuli that make reactions automatic and almost instinctive. You no longer respond to life by choosing. You only react to it out of habit. And that is when the feeling of losing control begins to seep in. A strange emptiness covers your efforts. You feel you are doing many things, yet none of them leads you where you truly want to go. If something here touches a quiet place inside you, leave a small message in the comments as a trace of the self-awareness you just reached. And if you want to walk further on this journey, subscribing can be like placing a stone to mark your path. A quiet gesture, not for show, but more meaningful to you than you might realize. Sometimes a single step like that is enough to let the mind know you are beginning to return to it. When a person loses the ability to reflect, they often feel as if they are drifting. Not drifting in a gentle way, but floating in a suspended state, touching neither the bottom nor the surface. Everything seems to happen outside of them. Life moves like a fast-forward film while they stand there sensing motion but unable to join it. That distance is the root of many silent pains. The feeling of not belonging where you are. The feeling of being surrounded yet still alone. The feeling of acting without knowing why you must act. And when that drifting lasts too long, the mind begins to seek shortcuts to soothe itself. It seeks easy distraction, quick bursts of stimulation, anything that can divert it from the growing emptiness inside. But those shortcuts are thin layers of ice covering a deep lake. Stay on them too long and you will fall through. Because distractions never heal the absence of your own self. There is something people rarely say about overload. It does not only steal the ability to think deeply, it steals the ability to feel deeply. Emotions that once seemed clear become dim shadows without a name. You love, but do not feel whole. You are sad, but do not know why. You feel anger, but cannot trace its source. You feel joy for a moment, but lose the feeling right away. When emotions have no time to form, they become tiny fragments of waves that never flow. And humans, guided more by emotion than logic, begin to lose the compass that helps them know who they truly are. A mind without reflection cannot tell the difference between the true whisper of the self and the echo of the world. It believes illusions easily. It wanders off course easily. It loses the values that once mattered most. And in some moment, in the chaos of too many choices, it will stop, lost, unsure how to begin again. But that stopping, painful as it is, becomes the chance to see what has been hidden. Only when everything grows blurry are we forced to look for real light. Only when the mind can no longer run does it turn inward. And that inner place, though untouched for so long, is still there waiting with quiet patience. The exhaustion you feel is not the collapse of your ability, but a reminder that it has been too long since you offered yourself the stillness you need. In that stillness, the scattered pieces of your mind can finally find one another again. And once that connection returns, motivation will not need to be found. It will rise on its own, not as a burst of excitement, but as a calm and steady flow that endures. There are days when you feel as if you are standing in the middle of an empty station platform, watching the train of life rush past while you cannot step onto any carriage. It is not that you do not want to go. It is that something inside pulls you back, like an invisible thread holding you still. Others may think you lack determination, lack motivation, lack will. But if you look deeper, you will see that this stillness is not weakness. It is a quiet rebellion against a rhythm that no longer fits you. When the mind is overloaded, paralysis does not appear as giving up, but as a survival response. It is like the body falling ill after being ignored too long. In that moment, stopping is no longer a choice but a necessity. The mind works the same way. It knows when it has reached its limit, when it must retreat inward to protect the parts that are hurting. The frightening part is not that you cannot do anything, but that you do not understand why you stopped. You feel the heaviness but cannot trace its source, and that uncertainty makes you think you are failing. There are afternoons when you stare at a long list of tasks, each one a step toward a life you know matters, yet your hands do not move. You try to push yourself with logic, but logic no longer creates any reaction. You tell yourself to just begin, to just take one small action, but something inside refuses. It is stubborn, silent, yet so strong you cannot fight it, and you begin to blame yourself. But maybe the force holding you still is not laziness. Maybe it is the voice of a part inside you that has been forgotten for too long. A part that once wanted something real and simple, but was set aside so you could chase goals borrowed from others. That part, when abandoned long enough, hardens and resists anything that does not belong to it. Paralysis is its way of asking to be seen, not through pressure, but through attention. Try to remember the last time you felt genuine excitement for something. It may have been so long that the feeling is now unclear. You did not forget because you are weak. You forgot because for years your mind has lived according to a version of you that was never truly yours. What you pursue has slowly become like coats larger than your real size, making every step heavy and uncomfortable. You try to wear them because everyone else does, because they are considered right, because you think you should have them. But inside, your inner being is suffocating under the weight. No one sees this quiet battle because it happens inside you. In the dark corners, no one can touch. Others see your stagnation, but you know better. Some pains do not make a sound. They form layers of fatigue over every thought. Some things are buried so deeply you cannot name them. You can only feel their weight in each step. Your paralysis is not collapse. It is a warning. A signal that you cannot keep running on borrowed motivation, empty goals, and expectations planted in your mind by lives that are not yours. It tells you that you've gone far enough, that continuing forward will only deepen the wound. Your mind is protecting you from the old habit of hurting yourself without knowing. Imagine you are a tree planted in barren soil under harsh light and cared for by hands that do not understand how you grow. At first, you still try, still reach upward, still create leaves, still find ways to survive. But over time, the poor soil keeps your roots from taking in nourishment, and the artificial light drains the natural green from your leaves. Eventually, you stand still, not growing, not dying, simply suspended. People see you not progressing, but they do not understand that this stillness is how you save your last bit of strength. If you tried to grow further in those conditions, you would break. Humans are the same. When we live in a mental environment that does not nourish us, under pressures that do not align with our values, we cannot blossom. Stopping is not failure. It is the soul keeping you safe from collapsing entirely. It holds you in place so you do not lose the deepest parts of yourself. Many people fear paralysis because they think it is a sign they are falling behind. But sometimes it is the only thing keeping them from falling into the abyss. When the mind no longer wants to take another step, it is asking to be heard. Not the noise of the world, but the voice of the forgotten parts within. The parts that never left, only waited for a moment with enough space to speak. There is a truth few admit. You cannot force yourself to be motivated if that motivation does not rise from something meaningful. You can push yourself for days, weeks, even months, but that force always has a limit. When the inner core is untouched, all effort becomes nothing more than a tired shove into emptiness. The paralysis you experience is an invitation to return to what once held meaning, not to chase old goals again, but to recognize what you lost in the noise. It does not push you to do anything. It simply asks you to place your hand on your true heartbeat again. And when you dare to stop and listen, you will see something you have never noticed before. This stillness is not a pit. It is a door leading to an inner world you have been away from for too long. A world where pieces of you remain whole, untouched by time, unshaken by noise. They are waiting for you to come home. When a person is held too long in paralysis, a strange moment often appears. Even though the body feels anchored down, the mind begins to see farther, not far in the physical sense, but far in depth, like standing in a dark room for hours until your eyes adjust and hidden shapes slowly reveal themselves. The stillness that seemed like an ending becomes the opening, where you finally see how far you have drifted from your true path. In that newly formed quiet, something begins to move. Not big, not loud, just a small shift. Like a breath rising in a place you thought had dried out long ago. It is not excitement, not sudden energy. It is like a thin light, so faint that without attention you would think it never appeared. But the light is real, and it comes from a place we rarely face directly. The reason we want to live. Some call it meaning, but for most of us, it is simply the sense that something is worth walking toward. Not something to show off, not a goal to impress others, but a quiet truth that keeps your life from feeling directionless. It might be someone you love, an old dream, a memory you cannot explain, but that refuses to leave. It can be very small, yet heavy enough to pull your heart toward it every time you stand at a crossroads. In the harshest chapters of human history, there were people who faced darkness far deeper than the exhaustion we face today. And strangely, in that darkness they found something suffering could not take away. They still had something to live for, not because they were stronger or braver, but because they understood that when the soul no longer has a reason to continue, the body, no matter how strong, will eventually surrender. This changes the entire question of motivation. Motivation does not come from convenience or temporary excitement or the pressure of others. It grows from a quiet commitment to what truly matters. When that reason exists, even if fragile, people can walk through the darkest places. But when it is absent, even the simplest days feel heavy. The lack of motivation you feel is not the collapse of will. It is the empty space where that reason should be. Nothing is pulling you forward, so every movement feels meaningless. You try to push, but inside, there is no anchor. And no one can live forever on borrowed goals. What you chase for others will always slip from your hands when your mind grows tired. If you look back at the moments when you were strong, you will realize you kept going, not because you were skilled. You kept going because something inside you needed to be fulfilled. A promise, a vision of who you wanted to become, a faint but true sense of the worth of your existence. When that appears, the exhaustion does not vanish, but it becomes smaller, and the road ahead, even if not bright, becomes visible. Your exhaustion is not only fatigue, it is lost direction, and direction does not come from outside. It is not in advice, or plans, or social expectations. It lies in a private place no one can walk into with you. It is the place where the question is not what you need to do, but why that thing is worth doing. Many people live their whole lives in noise without ever asking that question. They chase images of success that were built for them, dreams that were advertised, crowded roads that made them believe the crowd must be right. But when night falls and silence enters, they feel a nameless emptiness because their true self was never consulted. We often think we must be happy to live fully, strong to keep going, or full of motivation to begin. But there is a paradox anyone who has known deep pain understands. Sometimes we find strength only when we dare to live for something that cannot be traded away. Meaning creates motivation, not the other way around. To understand this, you do not need to survive extreme circumstances. You only need to pause and look into the place where silence has led you in recent days. You will find small fragments of yourself, desires covered by dust, values you thought you lost, shapes of who you wanted to become but never had the chance to. All of them lie there, like old objects in a chest no one opened. They did not disappear. They only need light. And when you touch them, even with a hesitant glance, you will hear what your mind has been trying to say for so long. You are not lacking motivation. You are lacking a reason to move. A reason true enough to make you accept difficulty. A reason strong enough to carry you through fatigue. A reason that turns life from mere survival into direction. There is a sentence once spoken from a place where the darkness was almost beyond imagination. Man is capable of enduring any how as long as he has a why, not as philosophy, but as truth distilled from pain, from survival, from direct confrontation with human nature. And perhaps it is time to ask yourself the only question that can pull you out of paralysis. What is your reason? When the question of why you exist begins to form, even faintly, the first thing that shifts is not your actions, but the way you step into silence. The silence you once tried to avoid suddenly becomes a different kind of space. Like a room you locked years ago now, calling you to open it just a little. Not to find answers right away, but to sense what has survived behind that door. In that silence, the deepest parts finally reveal themselves. People fear silence, not because sound disappears, but because buried voices begin to rise. In those moments, the mind is no longer shielded by familiar noise. It must face the layers of emotion pushed aside for years. A quiet sadness, a soft emptiness, an old longing that never had a name. They appear like reflections on water when the wind stops. And even though they are not always comfortable, they are real. They are parts of you that stayed, waiting to be heard. Sometimes you sit in your familiar room, evening light falling across the floor, and suddenly you realize how long it has been since you last sat still. You are not holding your phone, not searching for something to fill the gap. You simply sit there, listening to the breath touching your chest. For the first time, you feel a subtle thrill, like stepping into a wild place that feels both strange and familiar. This is the moment silence begins to do its work, returning to you the fragments that noise once stole. You might feel a little uneasy in this state because the stillness reveals cracks you never noticed. But those cracks are not new. They only become visible when noise is no longer covering them, like a bright light shining on glass, revealing tiny fractures not to frighten you but to show you what needs care. This is not the path of weakness. It is the shape of recovery beginning to form. In that space, you may recognize things that once weighed on you. A relationship left unresolved. A dream folded and hidden away. A memory that tightens your throat every time it returns. They come back not to torment you, but to be acknowledged. And sometimes acknowledging them is enough to ease the pain halfway. Many people mistake silence for avoiding life. But silence is actually where life begins to show you what you have avoided. The thoughts you pushed away with work, with social media, with endless schedules. When silence arrives, they step out gently, as if they have waited for this moment all along. And that presence opens a door into the deeper layers of your being. Places you have never walked into before. There are evenings when you turn off all the lights, lean against the wall, and let a soft glow from outside fill the room. In that half-light, the mind begins to root again. It stops chasing quick stimulation and starts listening to the quiet movements within. You discover parts of yourself that are still alive, still intact, only covered by dust. Parts you thought you lost reveal themselves as small, simple desires that once made you feel more like yourself. Silence is where those parts finally speak, not with words, but with feelings. A tightness in your chest, when you think of what you never finished. A long breath when you realize how long you have lived inside a story that was not yours. A warm wave rising when you remember a moment that once made you believe life could hold meaning. In this inner territory, something that used to be vague becomes clear. Motivation does not return when you run faster. It returns when you slow down enough to hear which part of you is calling. When that call comes, even softly, you will recognize its truth by a small trembling, like the sound of a pin touching glass. Not loud, not urgent, just impossible to ignore. Some say every person carries a task no one else can replace. Not a grand task, but a path shaped exactly for their own feet. We lose the sense of that task when we live too long in noise, but silence gives it a chance to return. And when it does, even if the world remains chaotic, your way of seeing it begins to shift. You realize you do not need to search for big answers. You only need to stand in silence long enough for the real questions of your life to appear. And once the question rises in its true shape, the answer is never far. Because what you seek is not out there. It rests in the quiet spaces you once feared, but now long to return to. When silence begins to carry its own voice, you will see yourself drawing closer to what was lost. True presence. Not presence for the world, but presence with yourself. And from that presence, meaning slowly finds its name. At some point, after sitting in silence long enough and seeing your real pieces come into view, you realize something simple yet profound. You cannot keep living the way you did. Not because life demands it, but because a part of you has awakened. It is not loud. It is not urging you. Yet its presence makes your old habits, the ones that helped you forget the emptiness for a while, suddenly feel too heavy, too distant. You begin to sense you no longer have the strength to keep running in the same worn-out circles. Not because you have become weaker, but because you are changing. That moment arrives slowly, sometimes as a morning when you open your eyes and feel you no longer want to live on autopilot. It is not an explosion, not a revolution, just a quiet awareness. The mind no longer wants to be controlled by outside noise. It wants to speak, to breathe, to move at a different rhythm. And that marks the beginning of a new journey, the journey of intention. True motivation, when it returns, does not arrive in a burst of excitement. It does not shake you awake. It does not pull you forward. It does not bring the thrill people often describe when starting something new. Instead, real motivation feels like a small ember in your chest, warm enough to let you know it is there, but not bright enough to flame instantly. You must protect it, shield it from the wind, keep it breathing. And each day, it grows brighter. You realize you do not need to change everything at once. You do not need to become the best version of yourself immediately. You only need to do one thing. Choose what is right for you, even if it is small. One honest choice can shift your entire direction. You turn off a noise you once let fill every spare moment. You decline something that no longer reflects your true values. You say no to an expectation you have carried for too long. These small actions, done with awareness, are the first steps on a new path. Some days you feel lighter simply because you paused long enough to listen to your breath. Some days you feel stronger not because you did more, but because you understand why you were doing it. That strength does not shout. It flows quietly, steadily, like an underground spring you thought had disappeared. It rises every time you do something that aligns with your deepest values. And over time, it gives you something distraction never can: inner weight. From that moment, life is no longer a chain of unconscious reactions to noise. It becomes a journey with direction, even if your pace is slow. You no longer run because you fear falling behind. You no longer work to please others. You no longer live by borrowed goals. You begin to live by choice, by intention, by the clarity between what you feel and what you do. And when those two join, the paralysis begins to fade. There will be days you slip back into old habits, letting yourself drown in noise. That is not wrong. Healing is not a straight line. It is a winding road, and at times you step back only to find a new balance point. What matters is not that you never stumble, but that you know how to return to silence, the place where you found yourself. Each time you return, you see more clearly what you have stepped away from. And little by little, you stop feeling lost. You may not notice it at first, but when you slow down enough to hear your inner voice, everything outside begins to change color. Things that once scared you no longer loom as large. Things that once distracted you lose their shine. And things you once overlooked become precious. simply because they are real, because they belong to you. Eventually, you will stand before your life and realize the reason to live is not something grand. It may be someone who needs you, a value you cherish, a forgotten wish, or simply the desire to create something with your own hands. It may be small, but if it is true, it is enough to carry you through your hardest days. Because as someone once said, from an unimaginably dark place, everything can be taken from a person except one thing, the last freedom, to choose their attitude in any circumstance, to choose their own way. That freedom is still inside you, even now. Even when you think you are exhausted, it is not lost, only buried under layers of noise and the weight of who you try to become. When you step into silence, when you are honest about what hurts you, when you can name what makes you want to live, that freedom rises like an ancient spring finding its way back to the light. And then, on a completely ordinary day, you feel something you thought was impossible. Motivation returning, not as a strong wind pushing you forward, but as a warm current flowing gently beneath your skin. Not loud, not sudden, but real, very real. You begin to walk, lightly but with direction, slowly but with meaning. And on that path, you are no longer sustained by noise. You are guided by something only you can hear, the quiet call of your own soul. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this story. If this message touched your heart, please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell so you'll never miss the next journey we take together. Your support means the world to me.